Hello everyone, my name is Rajiv and this is the channel called Selective Malts. Today I have something really special for everyone. I have in front of me the celebration pack from whiskey that recently won Best Whiskey in the World, and that is the Rampur Asava. Now first things first, a common question that is coming across is how do you pronounce Asava? So the name Asava is actually derived from a Sanskrit word Asav, which means wine, and that is what is so special about this whiskey as well, and hence the name Asava. This whiskey, as the name suggests, comes from a town in Uttar Pradesh called Rampur. Nothing stands out in anyone's mind when you say the word Rampur. That's because there's almost 32 cities all over India, and in fact even in Nepal and as far as Indonesia, called Rampur. But this one in particular does have history associated with it. First, the distillery, as the box proudly mentions in multiple places, was set up in 1943, which was before India became an independent country and established itself as a country away from its British rulers. So it was founded in 1943. It is from a place called Rampur in Uttar Pradesh, but there is something special about that place in Uttar Pradesh, in Rampur. That place called Rampur, or Rampur, which is still a place by the way. So Rampur in particular is known for a very particular type of knife called the Rampuri knife. And in fact, if you have watched Bollywood movies like I have growing up, you would have noticed the knife come up in many Bollywood scenes. In fact, Rampur even today is known for the knife as well. But now, as you can see, India is evolving and changing. Rampur is now getting its name from this whiskey in particular called the Rampur whiskey. What else is special about this whiskey in particular? So obviously the whiskey itself very proudly mentions on the front that it is matured in American Bourbon barrels, but at the same time what is special is for the first time they have finished this off not in imported Cabernet Sauvignon barrels, but in barrels from a winemaker in a state called Maharashtra and a place called Nasik. So they took the wine barrels from a place called Nasik and they finished off this whiskey in that wine barrel, and as far as I've heard, it is the reason for its particularly fruity and very aromatic flavors that go with this whiskey. Let's get to the best part of this video, which is the actual unboxing of this whiskey. First things first, I want to talk a little bit more about this box itself. Now in the front you can clearly see it mentions the name, very proud, and of course the Asava there, and it also talks about the fact that this is the first time ever that a whiskey has been finished in Indian source Cabernet Sauvignon casks, and that's very important. Let's go ahead and open this up for you and talk about the presentation of the whiskey. Like I said, this is the special celebration edition or the celebration pack, and this comes with the bottle, the two glasses right here and the bottle of whiskey over here, and on the inside it gives you a brief description of what is so special about this whiskey. So in the front it talks about how it's been finished, it's been matured in American Bourbon cask and then in special Indian red wine Cabernet Sauvignon casks on the side over here. And that is about the front. Let's talk a little bit about the back of the whiskey. So now on the back it talks about the city of Rampur, about its heritage, and also what is so special about this particular wine, what is so special about this particular whiskey, experience or the notes, and I'll be talking about those notes and reading off the back of the box in later half of this video. Let's go ahead and talk about the actual experience. Now let's get on with the bottle itself. Now, unlike other Scotch whiskies which I've spoken about earlier and will be talking about, they don't have the date of the foundation of the distillery mentioned anywhere clearly or embossed on the glass, on the bottle. In fact, this is pretty much similar to the standard bottle of Rampur that they have, and which you can see in the background over there. Let's talk about what I've mentioned earlier. What is the alcohol by volume? This is 45% This is 45% alcohol by volume, and if you remember, that basically means for every 100 ml of the drink that you pour out, 45 ml of that will be pure alcohol. What else do we have? Nothing apart from the fact that it mentions again that it was meticulously finished off in Cabernet Sauvignon barrels of red wine over there. Let's go ahead and do our favorite part of this, which is the pop. And let's go ahead and now pour out the whiskey and talk about the color in particular. So as I mentioned earlier, this whiskey has retained some of its natural coloring. I'm not quite sure. In fact, let me take a quick look and see if they've added any color. Does that mention it on the bottle here anywhere? It doesn't mention, so I'm not quite sure if they have added color after the fact, but they've tried to make it resemble the wine red color that you would have from a classical red wine, especially a Cabernet Sauvignon. And other than that, I can safely say it's pretty clear, not extra cloudy like some of the Highland whiskies, or especially some of the Islay whiskies that I have reviewed or will review going forward. Yeah. And that is about the initial unboxing experience of this whiskey. Now let's get straight to the best part, which is actually tasting the whiskey. But before we go to tasting the whiskey, I have an advantage. The back of this box, as I had shown you earlier, actually mentions the experience of the whiskey. So I'm going to read off right off the box. So it says, there's a typical tropical fruity note of Rampur with added notes of apricot, blackberry and plum, followed with a faint hint of tobacco and spices. So let's see how much of that we can pick up in the nosing. So yeah, you can absolutely smell the fruitiness in the whiskey. It doesn't have the same fruity tones you'd have associated with a wine cask or a wine in particular, but there's definite fruitiness to it. So even before I go ahead and taste this whiskey, I can tell you that this is going to be a particularly fruity whiskey, not like your typical Scotch whiskies from Scotland. And I guess that's part of the appeal of it being uniquely Indian, and maybe that's something I like. Let's go. Cheers. Yes, I can absolutely... Oh yes, it's delightfully fruity, if anything. It's velvety, and as the box describes it, velvety Manuka honey sweetness highlighted by spicy oak, vanilla, and balanced with dryness from Indian red wine. Absolutely agree with that. It is exceptionally dry. In fact, there's a certain dryness in my mouth right now as I'm talking to you. In fact, might warrant another sip as well. Yeah, and it's got a very medium finish. Yeah, it's a really well-made whiskey all in all. I'm surprised. Being a Scotch drinker myself and being a real whiskey snob sometimes, I am surprised with what the people of Rampur have pulled off. In fact, if you can notice at the back of my collection, I have their other product, which is the original Rampur, the Double Oak, and we'll absolutely be reviewing that because from first impressions, it's absolutely worth the price of this. So... yeah, I can safely say it's a surprisingly good whiskey. Not your typical whiskey if you were planning on going really robust in flavor and a strong after finish. Not like your Lagavulin at all. In fact, if anything, this is diametrically opposite to the Lagavulin that we tasted overall. So now let's talk about the rating of this whiskey. Now, if you remember, our rating scale is in-depth and it is designed to make sure that whiskeys are rated in a different category and are rated across all the categories. So the first rating is for the appearance. Now, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being really bad in appearance, there's absolutely nothing there to look at and it's really down, to 10 being exceptional, we also take into factor in appearance the packaging as well as everything else that goes with the whiskey in terms of the bottling and the overall way the whiskey looks in the glass. I think I can safely rate this an 8 on 10 because this celebration pack that I got a hold of, maybe if I had the typical bottle, the rating would be lower, but I have to take into account the celebration pack that we had here, the 2 whiskey glasses that were provided, not like your typical Glencairn glasses as I had mentioned in the first part of the video, but definitely give it an 8 on 10 in terms of appearance, the overall look of the whiskey. It does have a deep color that is made to look similar to the Cabernet Sauvignon wine casks that it was finished in. So 8 out of 10 in terms of rating of the appearance of this whiskey. Now let's talk about the nosing and the aroma. Now the whiskey snob in me would absolutely dismiss such a whiskey if I didn't know that it was designed to be like this, and it was basically proud of its Indian heritage. Being an Indian myself fills me with pride to be able to review such a whiskey, to be honest. And the Indian heritage part of it, and it's proudly fruity on the nose, proudly not your typical alcoholic strong whiskey that it's supposed to be. I think on a scale of 1 to 20 I would give it a 12. The reason I'm not rating it higher is because when I think of a whiskey I think of something different, and it falls a little short on your typical whiskey experience in terms of the nosing, but not bad is what I would rate it. So a 12 is what I would rate this in terms of the nosing. Now let's talk about the final let's talk about the next thing, which is very important, which I was expecting to be different, which was the taste of this whiskey. How does it feel on the palate once you're putting that whiskey in your mouth and running it around your mouth to make sure your palate, every section of your palate is coated with that whiskey? Now on a scale of 1 to 30, I can safely say that this would definitely be a solid 22 in terms of the palate, because again, not your typical whiskey, not something I would recommend for people who don't like to move away from the traditional mold of whiskeys, but definitely unique in its own self. So I'll give it a 22 out of 30 in terms of the palate. Let's talk about the finish. That is, once you've taken that whiskey inside and gulped it down, what does that whiskey feel like? And I can safely say I would give it a really high rating on the finish. It's complex, it's velvety, and it's proudly Indian in that it's fruity, it's got great aroma. I would rate this whiskey an 18 on the finish, which is higher than the Lagavulin, because this is a different kind of whiskey and it's absolutely something you should have in your collection if you're going for something different, which is not your typical Scotch whiskey. Overall impression, where you take into factor everything, the origin of the whiskey, the way it's been blended, the way it's been set up, and the way it's been made ready, I think we will be giving this a 15 on 20 in the overall packaging of this whiskey. Keep in mind, this is not your traditional packaging that you would have. This is the special edition, or what you call the celebration edition. Now let's talk about the overall score of this whiskey. The overall score of this whiskey is a 75 on 100, which basically means it's good. It may not be excellent, it may not be exceptional, but it's a good whiskey. Should you be paying what it is asking for? Now that question is not that easy to answer, and this is feedback that I got that I should have spoken about in my last video. The cost of this whiskey. Now this whiskey in Canada I bought for close to 120 Canadian dollar, depending on what website you're getting it from. I think for 120 Canadian dollar, the entire packaging in mind, the flavor and the whiskey, I can safely say you should go ahead and buy this just for nothing else, to get something different in your whiskey collection. Especially if you're a whiskey aficionado like I am, I would definitely say go ahead with this whiskey. If you like what you saw today, make sure you hit the like and subscribe. Please leave me feedback. One thing before I wrap up the video today is the microphone is non-functional. That is my daughter's contribution, who said you should absolutely have that microphone on that video. So shout out to my daughter Radhya for that microphone. Thank you so much for watching, and let me know what's the next whiskey you want me to review. All of you have a great day.